Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Fullback Dive, brought to you by the good people at the Roto Street Journal, paving your way to fantasy glory, acting as your lead blocker to fantasy excellence, making all your football-related fantasies come true. I'm your host, Nat the Truth Jones, coming at you from the tiny little box in the bottom of the screen today because we're pressed for time, starting late, and so we're not even wasting time with the opening big, the Truth and the Wolf next to each other on the screen where we get our glow-up shots. Nothing like that even happening today, but I am, of course, joined by the Wolf of Roto Street himself, and we're continuing our division-by-division rankings. We polished off the AFC yesterday with the AFC West, and now we're plunging face first into the NFC, starting with the NFC East. How you doing, Wolf?
Hey, doing fantastic. Figured we'd start with a fun division. This is a tough one to sift through in terms of how the teams are going to finish and also all the fantasy products. A lot of interesting goodness. Even the worst teams in this division, like the Commanders, after finishing projecting them, I'm actually pretty surprised at how much I like a lot of their players fantasy-wise. So a lot of intrigue in this division. Cannot wait to dive in. We already got Jeremiah saying, go Cowboys. It's a big fan of the division. Good to see some regulars diving in, even though we're a little bit late on the start time. Appreciate you waiting it out for us. As we get going, that thumbs up is great, whether you're listening to the replay or live. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please do consider it to help us get out to more people. But as you said, we got to get going because we're late. We're behind schedule for some of our diehards here. So we want to make sure to get you everything that you were working for and looking for here.
All right, well, we're going to start off with the Giants. The Giants were one of the, I think, three teams that you heard me year in, year out say, I don't believe it. They got to prove it to me. I don't believe it. They got to prove it to me. I think it was them, the Jets, and the Jaguars that I was famously on soapboxes about for so long. Well, I mean, after starting out kind of looking the way you expect the Giants to always look, they actually finished really strong. And then by the time they found themselves in the playoffs, that's right, I said in the playoffs, and, there was even buzz where they're like, oh, maybe they'll knock off the Eagles. They did not. It came crashing down to earth, and they got absolutely decimated in that game. But I would still say at that point they were kind of playing with house money. They got a lot further than certainly than I thought they'd get. And I would say by most honest people's assessment, you'd have to call that year a big success for the Giants. So coming back strong into the 2023 season, tell me about the Giants and their fantasy prospects, Wolf.
Yeah, absolutely. A shocking turnaround for them under Brian Daboll. Huge fan of the guy. And I expect whether or not the record shakes out to reflect a huge jump forward, at least offensively, despite the big jump they already took, I think another one is in store this year. And you'll see in the projections, I'm very high on a lot of these guys, especially. I've been on record saying how much I love Daniel Jones. And then after statting him out, did nothing but confirm my love for him. So we'll dive into it. I do think we're going to see another spike in his production, and then it trickles down to everybody else. But starting at the team level, I do expect a jump in total volume as well as pass plays. Brian Daboll, historically, when he was with Buffalo, was about a 59 to 41% pass to run ratio. So much more pass happy, always around 60 to 80 plays above the league average. Last year was above the league average, but we saw a much closer 51% pass, 49% run. And that was about the midway point of the year, week 7 or so, when they finally started to uncork Daniel Jones. He started to average around 32 pass attempts per game. And I think that's going to take yet another spike forward. One, just because of second year in the system. They now know they want to commit to Daniel Jones rather than figuring out, is this our guy in the future? Or what are we going to be? What's our identity? Is it Saquon? Is it Daniel Jones? What's it going to be? We do think they committed, clearly they committed. They gave all the big money to Daniel Jones. So now they have that in place. They have a second year of him learning the system, but even more so, the fact that they've added Darren Waller, Paris Campbell, Jalen Hyatt through the draft, just weapons all over, bringing back Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins, who had great years for them as well. So between the weapons upgrades, second year in the system, and there's Daniel Jones being fully committed to, I think we're going to get a higher pass volume overall. So a big jump, about 60 to 50 pass attempts, going all the way up to 624. That'd be a little bit less than what we saw with Josh Allen, Brian Daboll connection there. And I think that's fair. It's Josh Allen versus Daniel Jones. It's still definitely a big step above him, but a big spike nonetheless in Daniel Jones' attempts, with the rushing volume coming down just slightly. And now we get a little bit of a 56% pass, 44% run ratio. That seems about right. It's like that happy medium between the Giants we saw last year, the Bills we've seen in the past of Brian Daboll. That felt like a pretty good pie distribution to me. So with that big jump in volume, obviously production should, and I think will happen for Daniel Jones. As you can see here, 4,600 yards, 33 touchdowns. Both of those would be career highs by a mile for Daniel Jones. And I don't think that's a stretch at all, given his second year within the first really competent offense he's ever been in. So big spikes for him. Those are really big spikes. So maybe I'm a little too high compared to the general consensus, but this is hinging on them really getting into a much pass happier offense there. Big spikes there. The thing with Daniel Jones that you love to see, over 120 rush attempts last year, over 700 yards on the ground with Brian Daboll. In fact, I actually am going to take these ints down a little bit because he really cut down the interception ratio. He was the only quarterback to have over 700 rush yards and under 10 interceptions. So with him airing it out a little bit more, I do think maybe he does get into double-digit interceptions, but still keeps those relatively low with that improved decision-making. And then right around 6 to 7 touchdowns, what we saw last year. Sneaky Konami upside to Daniel Jones. His teammates called him Vanilla Vic all last year. And he's averaged 6.5 yards a pop across his last 3 seasons. So 5.7 would be a little bit of a down step too. So this might be a conservative rushing ceiling that we're projecting here. And that kind of balances out the big pass ceiling. I see him reaching to balance out, maybe a little bit less rushing upside since they're thrown more this season. But either way, however you want to slice that, around 5,200 total yards, around 40 total touchdowns for Daniel Jones. That would be a monster season. And where he's going right now, and round 10 or so, would make him the ultimate steal in fantasy drafts. I feel really good about it, Truth. Do you think I'm nuts for my Daniel Jones love this year?
No, I actually really like him too, but I know that your projections certainly are not like the line that DraftKings or anything like that is going to give out. But if they were giving out 4,600 yards and 33 passing touchdowns, I'd be slamming the under like a motherfucker. Daniel Jones averages over his career 2,900 yards, maybe something like that for a season. I know we're talking about big changes. You're talking about over 50%, upping his stuff. He had 15 touchdowns. Actually, you gave the stat about the rushing, the rushing yards and the interceptions. It's actually even better than you said. You're he had 700 yards and less than 10 picks. He had 5 picks. The guy was very efficient with the ball. He was not even close to 10 picks. And so he has improved as a passer, but you're projecting such massive gains. I would definitely be hitting the under on that. Even if you think he's going to improve a ton, he could improve a ton and not approach those numbers, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. I do think it's a combination. You need a lot of things to go right for that projection to hit. I 100% agree. And I will probably look heavily into what his projection is, because I imagine Vegas is sending it right around 4,000. As you said, he's never been above his career high is 3,200, which was last year, his first in a competent offense. I am projecting just a huge spike in overall volume to facilitate that in terms of Brian Daboll getting back to what he typically did with Buffalo. And maybe he doesn't. Maybe he keeps it at a 51 to 49%, and then in which case this would definitely smash under. But the jump in touchdowns, the jump in yards also has a lot to do with him throwing to actual NFL receivers and talent this year as well. The fact that Richie James was their leading receiver in target share last year tells you all you need to know what he was throwing to and that he was still getting it done, at least fantasy wise. Tells me everything I need to know. So yeah, you're right. This would be a 1,400 yard jump. That's huge and probably a little too much. So something I will need to check and see. But I don't know. I do think Brian Daboll, just given what we've seen between him and Josh Allen, yes, big talent gap between Daniel Jones and Josh Allen. I'm not saying they're similar, but I do think with the increased weaponry for Daniel Jones to close that gap between him and Josh Allen even halfway could mean a ginormous spike in overall production. Even if he even just gets to 4K and 28 touchdowns, that would be
that's kind of more where I am. I'm more in that range, which I even feel a little bit wow, man, that would be an unprecedented season for this guy, especially if he's still around 700 yards rushing or even in that vicinity. Don't let me be a wet blanket here. Like, you
You're
know
not
me.
being a wet blanket. It's a good. You're the truth for a reason. We call you the truth. You're throwing a little truth on this. It was definitely an aggressive spike to reflect my love for Daniel Jones and this offense as a whole. Probably a little bit too much, but happy meet him. Even if he got to that just 4K and 28 touchdowns, still in round 10, given the rushing production that we're seeing there, would be a really, really nice pick. Yes. So either way, I'll probably taper these back a little bit for everyone out there. I do think it might be a little high, but they talked so much about how they're prioritizing. He had a decent year last year, and they were dead last in terms of big plays, tied with the Rams last year with plays that only 16 pass plays went for 25 yards or more. They go and then target as many speed guys as they can. Paris Campbell, a 4.3 40. Jalen Hyatt, 4.3. They bring back Darius Slayton, who runs a sub 4.4 there. And they'd already talked about Brian Daboll and Slayton had a great quote. What's the point of having Ferraris to leave them in the garage? So all practices, all early OTAs, he's finding these mismatches. He's making sure to hit them deep. It is, of course, as we say on all these shows, padless practices, shorts. I get that. But they're talking a ton about how with Darren Waller over the middle right now, it's opening up so much underneath to have that type of weapon. And so, when you have this speed, you have those mismatches, I think a humongous spike. And again, I can tell now a humongous spike could be just getting to 4K yards and 28 touchdowns. Not
that is a humongous spike. It really is. Like that. It would be almost an unprecedented spike. So as much as I like Daniel Jones, I will taper these back a little bit. So take the rest of these with a grain of salt. But when I go through these weapons, Truth, you're going to kind of it's going to be, okay, so who's the one that gets dinged? Or is it just an overall volume thing? And 624 pass attempts is too much. And they're more so going to be at 570 and everybody's kind of gets taken down. So let's see, when I break down these shares, what's, if any of them really stand out to you as not in line with what could happen here. So I have ultimately 15% share in terms of we'll talk about strictly the passing game right now, and then we can get to Saquon because that's a lot easier to project. The guy's a monster. But I think about 15% of targets, right? What we saw last year, Saquon. So right around 94 with that big spike in looks. I could see that being realistic for him. And then after that, it's really tricky because I think all these receivers are all pretty similar in terms of how I expect him to go. 14% to Darius Slayton, 15% to Hodgins, 17% going to Paris Campbell. That obviously means I think he wins that slot role, which I think is the most solid receiving role in this offense. Richie James averaged the highest target share last year as the slot guy for really only half the year before Sterling Shepard got hurt and then Wan'Dale Robinson. But Shepard was looking really solid. Then Wan'Dale looked good. And then it was Richie James the rest of the year. So whoever ends up being the slot, and right now Paris Campbell seems like the early favorite, very active in OTAs. The beat writers saying they expect him to lead this team in wide receiver catches, but then those beat reports also suggesting they expect Darren Waller to lead the team in overall targets and receiving production. And I also project it that way with 19% target share, 119 targets going Darren Waller's way. So starting at the top with him, I think he turns 119 targets, which wouldn't be crazy for Waller. We've seen him go for 140 targets back in the past with the Raiders. I have him turning that into 80 catches, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. All the reports are glowing about this guy, the mismatches he's creating. His rapport with Daniel Jones is on point. Daniel Jones talking about how much he loves him and how easy this guy is going to make his job on Sundays, given the mismatch nightmares you can create with Darren Waller. You, of course, need health, which we haven't seen for 2 years now with Darren Waller, but I love the idea that the coaches are talking about, we're going to be careful what the hits this guy takes. Do we really want to use him as a blocker right now when he's essentially an alpha, studying Julio Jones and AJ Green tape? I expect him to be their alpha, kind of in de facto wide receiver one here, Darren Waller. So that's a big season for a tight end. You typically do not see 1,000 yards at the position, never mind 80 catches. So I imagine when these things all shake out, there'll be Travis Kelce at the top. I think Darren Waller is going to threaten for a top 4 spot in my projections after everything is all said and done. In fact, I have him ranked below Dallas Goedert, but after statting them both out today, Waller had better numbers than Dallas Goedert in there. So I might have to adjust my rankings to reflect that. Other than that, again, the yards might be a big jump. I really wouldn't be shocked at all if he jumps to about 30 touchdowns, though, given Isaiah Hodgins, great touchdown threat last year, ultimately
only played for about half the season with this team and emerged, on 8% target share, still led the team with 9.5 fantasy points per game. I think he can take it to another level with a full season there. Had himself a really nice run. Him and Richie James both did to close out the year last year. But also Darius Slayton had himself a good year. 31% of his games were well inside that wide receiver 2 or higher range. He had 14 or more points in right around half his games last year. So Slayton, despite being a nobody to start the year, really picked it up as well. And then Richie James, had a great season. So that's where I really get excited about him as a slot. Once he took over for Wan'Dale, once Wan'Dale got hurt from week 12 on, so week 11 to week 17, he was the wide receiver 12, Richie James, behind only T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Devonta Smith, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Devonta Adams, and Justin Jefferson. So all 11 of those guys you expect to be in your top 12. And then it's like Richie James on pace for 108 targets to close the year. Just want to reemphasize that slot role is so damn solid. But again, Isaiah Hodgins, once he really took over a starting role, it wasn't for the last 5 weeks of the season. He averaged 15.2 PPR points per game, was a top 14 wide receiver in that span as well. So he has some good chemistry here. I just think it's a lot of weapons. And ultimately, they're all going to have their spike weeks. It's going to be tricky to project outside, again, of whoever that slot rolls. I think that's a nice, consistent weekly roll. But 1 week, Hodgins might spike for 2 touchdowns. And the next week, it's Slayton catching a 70-yard bomb down the sidelines. I don't know that in redraft, you'll consistently be able to rely on anyone outside of maybe Paris Campbell at the receiver position. But in best ball, I think all these guys are going to have some nice spikes. I really do like ultimately stacking them up. As you can see, 56, 840, and 5 for Slayton, 730 and 7 for Isaiah Hodgins, building off that really strong finish of last year. And then leading the way in receptions would be Paris Campbell, 72, 792 yards and 5 touchdowns as well. Who knows if Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, maybe they eat into that slot role and we just don't get a consistent guy right here. But as I project it now, it does look like Paris Campbell would be the lead there. And of course, Saquon then 68, 442, and 3. That'd be right in line with what we always expect with him. So that's all the receiving work. And I know you question Daniel Jones getting to as many receiving yards as I say here. Which of these receivers, if any truth, was there anyone that you're like, I do not buy that argument in the least?
I'm skeptical of all the receivers. I do like Waller a lot.
Yeah.
And I hear you projecting him over Goddard. And I think that if this receiving core is going to produce the way you're suggesting that they will, I've never, it's like they're like, oh, Paris Campbell's going to lead the receiver. I don't believe in Paris Campbell at all. I don't know. I mean, call me old fashioned, but I don't. I think that the receiving work would have to improve kind of, and this is not like a hot take or anything, on the back of Daniel Jones taking his game to the next level, and also Darren Waller and potentially Saquon just opening things up. I believe in both of those guys as talents, as great talents, even though Waller has, underachieved at times. He's been incredible at times. And I don't know, maybe one of these guys, maybe one of these receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson, let's not forget he was the MVP of training camp last year. So
first round draft capital was drafted by this regime. So yeah, it might, and that's kind of where I'm getting. I think they just have a lot of solid guys, and all of them will have their good moments throughout the season. If one man gets hurt, they have the depth now to step somebody up in between them. But yeah, I'm with you in terms of the only real consistent guys here. Probably Waller, probably Saquon, and I love both of those guys.
And Daniel Jones. I do think Daniel Jones, look, he proved it at the end of last year. He's, he can produce fantasy-wise. He absolutely can. We'll see. I do hear what you're saying as far. I'm not touching any of those receivers in just a standard draft. Best ball, I could see the potential there. You have a lot more kind of margin for error in a best ball situation, and so I could see taking a guy or two from that list under those conditions. But I don't have faith in any of these guys to consistently produce. Maybe one or more of them will prove me wrong. It certainly happened before.
Yeah. I'm with you too. And that's kind of the whole point with all these guys is I'm with you. I do love that you can take Daniel Jones round 10 and then any of those guys I listed, whether it's Campbell, Hodgins, Slayton, pick your choice, whoever you think is going to be the best, pick your top 2 of the 3, even Wan'Dale Robinson, toss him in the list. All those guys go round 16 or later. So you can really get that late stack like Daniel Jones, and then have a couple of his weapons. So when Daniel Jones and those guys spike together, bam, they're both in your lineup, and you don't have to worry about it consistency-wise. But yes, I don't think I'm going to rely on these guys very heavily, if at all, in redrafts, other than maybe like a waiver wire bye week fill-in type of guy. But yeah, you did mention Daniel Jones, the consistency. I didn't even say this on this pod, but anybody that listens to the top 20 quarterbacks, you've heard this one many times. I've tried to talk about him. Quarterback 9 on the season, quarterback 6 from week 7 on, when they really finally let him take off. Had 330-plus days within that 10-week span. He had, 7 of those 10 weeks were 20 points or above. He really did get it together, and as Brian Daboll had his faith in him. So all these projections, all these big spikes are kind of just saying what happened from week 7 on is only going to be augmented by the fact that they have even better talent here now, and Brian Daboll's really going to let loose. I'm betting on it big with that huge spike, and I do think I'm going to take down the overall volume from 624 maybe to like 590 range, and we'll see a trickle-down effect. Why don't I do that now? Let's just see what kind of that looks like, because even 590 pass attempts would be like a 50 big jump. So let me just do this volume-wise and see what that does for Daniel Jones's stats at the end of everything, because I think that might be a little bit more believable. 4,300. 32, even still, that's still a huge jump for him, but it does feel a little bit better. And all these receiver numbers seem to look a little bit better. So I'm just going to save that. I think that is fair, with the other one being like, this is the ceiling if Daboll really, really unleashes this thing. But I shouldn't be projecting for ceiling, even if I believe in it and I'm buying it myself. I should project for what's more so the median. This feels a little bit better. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with your reasoning there too. I agree. You shouldn't be projecting ceiling, just in general, in my opinion. But maybe yeah, you're saying everything breaks his way. Maybe we could see a season like the one that you had up there before. Watch him come out and throw for like 5,200 yards or something. Make me look like an asshole.
Right. He triples it up. He throws the NFL record, like first guy to get to 6K.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it'll be on.
All right.
So yeah, we're like, all right,
about those Giants, though, clearly.
We're gonna hustle. We're gonna hustle through these, and then we do 21 minutes on the Giants.
Yeah. It's like I said, though, it's one of my favorite offenses in the league. So I really wanted to dive in deep. But yeah, maybe we get through 2 more with you, and I can solo rip through the rest if need be. I know you got to get running.
All right, let's do the Eagles. Let's see how long that takes us.
The Eagles are definitely a little bit easier to break down too. It's just because we've seen it for 2 straight seasons and kind of know what to expect. So yeah, let's dive into this Eagles.
Well, whenever we disagree about something, that always makes it the segment go like 7-8 minutes longer.
Yeah, of course.
All right, and the thing is, and not to go back to the Giants, I don't even disagree with you that Daniel Jones is going to be good this year and is a great steal at that price. I do. I like him a lot. When we did best ball together, we got him on at least 2 of the 3 teams we did together. It was great. So anyway,
exactly.
Let's get into
You're not projecting a historic jump like that no other quarterback has ever made from one season to the next. I get that.
All right, let's go into the Eagles. Obviously, the Eagles, they were kind of is it fair to say they were the kind of best team in the NFC all year?
Yeah. Very fair to say. Yeah. Absolutely.
Kind of just, and there was, buzz about the Giants, and then there was buzz about the 49ers and everything. The 49ers did have some extremely unfortunate breaks at the very end of the season when they finally met the Eagles in the playoffs. But, the Eagles totally handled, all these like up-and-comers as the season went on. Obviously, the Rams disappeared and were nothing. And then, the Eagles gave an excellent showing of themselves in the Super Bowl, and a couple things go differently, and they could have been the guys hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. How do you feel about them this year?
I think they're going to be great again. I think that they're clear leader of this division, and I think we know pretty much what to expect, and I don't expect a whole ton to change. Team level wise, in the 2 seasons with Jalen Hurts, they've been at most 50% pass, so they love to run the ball, and why wouldn't you? Last year, I really think the blueprint they had last year, it's if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. Bomb teams early. They do play with a real fast pace. They like to take those deep shots. Jalen Hurts was one of the best deep passers in the league last year. You certainly have great weapons to execute that. And then once you built that lead, you just suck your opponent dry. You run with that beastly offensive line, with Jalen Hurts, with whoever you have in the backfield, and you just bleed it out after you built a huge lead in the second half. We saw that time and time again last year. And so I expect a very similar, right around 50-50, right around 50 or so more plays than average in terms of the big pies for the ground and the pass game there. And this one would be projecting Jalen Hurts to stay healthy, as I try to do with my projections. What would happen if he stayed healthy? He has missed 2 games in back-to-back seasons, but ultimately, I would think this could be a season. If he does stay healthy, we could get a great one. So he's been around 30% rushing share in back-to-back years. I think it's very fair to keep him there, especially now with Miles Sanders gone. Maybe we see even a little bit more of an uptick in his rushing work. So starting there, that's the reason you love Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position. He's getting you quality running back 2 numbers, 794 yards, 10 touchdowns is what I project. He has done double-digit touchdowns in both of his professional seasons. He's been over 750 yards in both of his full professional seasons. So I don't think either of those is a big stretch, especially if they need to lean on him a little bit more with no Miles Sanders here now. The 4,500 passing yards, 31 TDs, that would be a big spike for him. And that would probably require that 2 games that he's missed in back-to-back seasons. He wouldn't be able to miss those games and hit over 4,000 yards this season. He also requires the division to be a little bit more competitive. And with the Giants picking things up, with the Commanders, a better overall offense, in my opinion, that's part of what I factored into the big passing game spike I projected. He's never been over 4,000 yards or 22 pass touchdowns. So both of those would be really big jumps for him. But I think with the way this division shaking out, I do think that is very, very possible. They do have a great defense, though, that maybe can limit it. So that would be a big spike for him. But I just see these weapons as being so dangerous, especially in their second season, to really get it all together with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. So in terms of how that pie is getting distributed, right around what we saw last year, 24% for A.J. Brown, 23% for Devonta Smith. I see very similar 26, 25% target shares, right around the volume. They saw a little bit of a boost there with more passing volume if they are playing tighter games in general. So 146 targets for A.J. Brown, 140 for Devonta Smith. And as you can see, right in line with what we saw last year, 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns. I think it's very reasonable to expect for A.J. Brown after he went for 11 touchdowns and right around 1,400 yards last year. I think it's more of the same, maybe just a little bit more consistency and a little bit more, a higher catch rate I have him going for. So that way he has a few more receptions. I do think Devonta Smith, just like he did last year, could pace this team in receptions, but given that it'll be a lower yards per reception, he'll be under A.J. Brown's total and get to about 1,216 yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, right around what we saw last year, with a little bit more volume, a little bit of a bump in both of those for year 2 of the chemistry. Where I see a player taking a nice little step would be Dallas Goedert. He was playing great last year, but then missed a handful of games middle of the season. But he has historically averaged right around 17% to 18% target share. So that's where I slotted him at, 18% target share, 101 targets, ultimately hauling in. Last year, he had over 80% catch rate. I don't think that sustains, but he's always been around 70 to 80, somewhere in that range. Very reliable underneath target, who's been running routes with the receivers in early practices, trying to really improve on his yak and just overall route skills. So maybe a slight bump in what we've seen career-wise for Dallas Goedert, certainly possible with him. So 9, 12, and 6 on 76 catches is what I see for Dallas Goedert. Would put him definitely in that conversation for a top 5 tight end season. And then it's really not a whole lot passing game-wise. A couple deep bombs from Quez Watkins. Maybe Dan Arnold hauls in a backup tight end touchdown. But I don't see much else happening there for receivers or tight ends. I do think after last year, only 65 targets went to the running back position. That was a league low. I think now that they've traded for DeAndre Swift, he could definitely get a spike up. The running back position in general could get a spike up in targets. So I'll just show you real quick. I distributed that 9% going to Swift. That would cut into Kenny Gainwell, who saw 11 and then 8% target share in back-to-back years. I do see Swift eating into that workload. He's just a more explosive player, very dangerous with a ball in his hands. He's had 3 or more receiving touchdowns in all but 1 year so far in his career. So I think 3 is very, very reasonable for him. That's where I expect the majority of the running back receiving work. That's maybe part of the spike I see with Jalen Hurts, is just the ability for Swift to take a tiny little reception and rip it through the entire defense and suddenly be gone. So I expect that to happen a handful of times there, especially in the screen game too, with those beastly athletic linemen getting in front of him. Man, I could see some great work. That just leaves us with the running game at this point. That's one of the biggest question marks for this Eagles team. I right now have it projected, and it's such a tough one to project because one, DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, they're both very talented. They're both very efficient, but they also both get hurt all the time. So how's it going to shake out? I have no clue. It's really, really tricky to project, but I will say this: Swift going around round 7 right now, and Penny going around round 9 to 10. I like he's often sometimes even later, like 11. I've gotten Rashad Penny. I like taking stabs on either of them. Particularly, I've gotten more Penny just because of the later price tag. But I mean, if I have Swift, that doesn't mean I'm not going to draft Penny just because I got one. I think both of them are going to get meaningful work. And behind the best offensive line in football, from whatever metric you want to look at, run blocking, pass blocking, PFF grades, they are an unbelievable stalwart unit that just opens up the biggest of holes for these guys. We saw Miles Sanders rush for 11 touchdowns last year. So I think this backfield combined, if you take out Jalen Hurts, the running backs all combined for over 15 touchdowns. I think that could definitely be in play with 14 right now, touchdowns total going to Swift, Penny, and Gainwell. I think the leading rusher will be Penny. He's just a pure burner. We saw just 2 seasons ago, weeks 14 through 17, this guy was the best running back in fantasy for your fantasy playoffs. He's been a hyper efficient guy throughout his career. This might seem insane to project him for 6.1 yards a carry, but he's been above 6.3 in back-to-back seasons behind a worse offensive line with Seattle inside a worse overall offense where they can stack the box more on him. He's still been an absolute monster, largely because the huge plays. This guy has some of the best highlight runs of the last couple of years. It's just a matter of health for him. But if he stays healthy and can get to 150 to 200 carries behind this line, I think 1,000 yards is definitely within Penny's reach. In addition to, I have him for 6 touchdowns. And again, trying to be a little conservative. And I still think, that number could easily be hit by Penny. So I really love him at his price. I don't think there's a lot of receiving meat on the bone for him when you got Swift and Gainwell also in the background. So it's really just going to be an early down role for him. But I think behind this line, that might be all you need for some really, really big spike weeks. Just hope you get them at the right time. But man, Swift stays healthy. He has the upside to go for 5.0 or so a pop, running about 5 or 6 touchdowns. He's always been a good touchdown scorer. He was 3rd in the league last year in fantasy points per opportunity. He just got dinged up, wasn't healthy all year. And that's always been the rub with Swift, is he struggles to play through injuries and be himself. And we'll see. I think this offense is definitely more dangerous, though, where he doesn't have to be a centerpiece. He can be more of a complementary piece. And in that role, he could really thrive and open up the efficiency quite a bit. So, 745 on the ground with 5 touchdowns and then about 300 yards. I could see him being about 1,000 total yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns. That would be a really good season for Swift at his price tag. And you can't discount Gainwell. I know I haven't projected for the least here, but a lot of people saying as the incumbent, he might lead this team in total touches. Plus, he's got 2 very injury-prone guys ahead of him. So I definitely think you're going to get some solid Kenny Gainwell weeks, whether it's because of injury, whether he just stays solid. He's been very efficient throughout his young career. So all 3 of these backs, Gainwell going by far the last round dart throw, Penny going around 10 through 12, and then Swift 7 to 8 range. I like the price tags on all of them. I projected them all pretty favorably, even in a shared committee, even with Jalen Hurts eating into all of it. I think all 3 of those guys can have solid seasons and warrant their price tags.
Yeah, I look at the Eagles as the Giants, but better. I feel like quarterback similar. Obviously, Hurts way more explosive, stuff like that. But if you look at their numbers and stuff and touchdown to interception ratio, they're not that dissimilar. I just look at the weapons that Hurts has, and they're just better, except, Saquon. I mean, Goddard and Waller, maybe that's a push. But, man, you asked me, like, who do you think is going to fall flat on that Giants receiving core? And I'm just like, it could be any of them. But, man, yeah. AJ Brown and Devontae Smith are just both the real deal. They really are. Yes. And that's a huge, huge difference. I did want to point out, you gave that stat on Jones, said he was the only 700-yard rusher with less than 10 picks. Jalen Hurts had 760 yards rushing and only 6 picks last year. So he's actually also in that club and pretty comparable. Very good touchdown to interception ratio for both of those guys. Both very careful with the football. And, of course, the 13 rushing touchdowns for Hurts last year really kept me in my fantasy league longer than I deserved to be there. So, I love the Eagles. They're fun to watch. Love Hurts. Got him on the cheap last year. Don't think that's going to be happening again, unfortunately. Yeah, I think I got
no way he'll be going cheap. It is just so crazy to think he led all quarterbacks last year in points per game, and
Yeah.
that was with throwing under 4K yards, under, I think he hit 22 passing touchdowns. So if we get this spike, which it doesn't seem that unreasonable if you get the health from Goddard and Hurts in the second year with those two beastly receivers, plus Swift adds a whole new receiving element. 4,500 might be a big stretch, but I just struggled because I looked at it as like, nope, I think A.J. Brown nails that. I think Devonta Smith nails that. I think 300 yards for Swift seems very reasonable. 900 for Goddard seems real. And I was like, where do I take it away? Because I don't want, this doesn't seem right, 4,500 yards for him, but then I don't know. And all these things seem fairly reasonable as well. Maybe it's just Quez Watkins only getting to 100 yards because he's just a nobody. And the de facto, those kind of ancillary pieces just not doing as much as these projections show them doing. But I don't think any of those big names are, I think they all do exactly what I projected them for because it's very similar to what they've already been doing their entire careers.
Love A.J. Brown as a player. Where is he going in drafts right now relative to Devonta Smith?
So, yeah, both those guys are – so he goes round 1, A.J. Brown in underdog drafts, given that the receivers go very heavy. He goes like top 8. He goes around 8, 9.
Really?
I don't have a ton of him just
I
because
don't love him there. I don't love him at 8, 9. I mean,
no,
seems
I don't really either. Devonta Smith does go late too. The thing is, as much as I do like these guys and I've statted them out, I bet you I'll get them more in redraft leagues where Brown's probably going to fall to early to mid round 2, and Devonta Smith might be a late 2, early 3rd turn. That's where I really would like to buy these guys. But right now, Brown is going at the same price tag as Austin Eckler. I'm going to take Austin Eckler there. You saw yesterday, having for 17 touchdowns and almost 2,000 yards, just like he's done in back-to-back years. So I'm going to keep riding that out. Smith goes kind of around Derrick Henry. That's tough for me to justify as well, even though I know Henry's on the cliff. And approaching it, I can't necessarily pull that trigger over him. But still, that's not a fault to them. I like the players going around him just a little bit more. But I do still really, really like these guys.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, like you said, I'm not taking him over Austin Eckler. I don't think I'm taking Devonta Smith over Derrick Henry. But I love these guys as players.
What do you think about Smith versus T. Higgins? If you were going to go a receiver there, which of those like number 2 but number 1 fantasy receivers guys are you more interested in?
I'm probably more interested in Higgins, although it's a good question. And it might be because I've been a Higgins owner that was served well by him in the past. You know how that goes. You know what I mean?
Nothing wrong with that. Like when you're picking hairs, it's so tough to decide which one of these guys I like more. I personally prefer Smith, but it's really about who's done it for you before. Like that's a totally valid justification if it's as close as those two are. And in projections wise, they're very close for me. I think Higgins a few more touchdowns and a little bit less yards and less catches. Very, very similar ultimate stats for the guys, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to lean a little bit towards Derrick Henry because I had him the year when he was just like, well, not the year, but a year when he was.
Which year, true? He's been an absolute tank for many.
He was like owning a tank. He really was. It was just like I remember. It was the year when it was just like not unrealistic for him to just like get a handoff at the 2 and just take it 98 yards.
Yes,
that was when I was living my best life.
That's still, I mean, he does that. He's been doing it last year, even at times. So that's it. And you think about the locker room presence too. Like when you get off the bus and your fantasy opponent sees Derrick Henry versus Devonta Smith. No insult to Devonta Smith, but you're talking about a 5'11", 185-pound guy versus like 6'2", 250 and ridiculous measurables and speed. Like one guy definitely strikes a little more fear into your opponents.
You're not like stressing about how am I going to keep tackling Devonta Smith in the fourth quarter.
Right, exactly. Not bludgeoning your defense to death, right?
All right. Well, unfortunately, I have to run. It's been very fun doing these two teams with you. We went kind of long on both of them, but they're both great presentations by you, and enjoyed the conversations about both of them. But I got to leave you solo to do Dallas and the Commanders. I'm interested to hear what you say about both those teams, so I'm going to be listening to this back in a couple hours. But yeah, sorry I got to bail early.
No, it's not your fault. We got a later start with technical difficulties at the beginning, and it's my mom's birthday today, so I was scrambling this morning, getting some stuff ready for her birthday party, and things happen. So it's on me, not you. So I appreciate you being here for the first two, for sure. And we'll be back at it tomorrow together for sure.
I'll be here tomorrow again. Thanks everybody that is tuned in now, and thanks to everybody that's going to check us out later. This pod will go up in a couple days. I'm posting, I think, AFC South tomorrow, so check that out when it goes up there. See you later, Wolf.
See you, Truth. Always a blast. All righty, so let me remove that, and we'll move on now to our next team, the Dallas Cowboys. This is a fun division to talk about. A lot of talent on the Cowboys as well. I do see some big overall philosophical changes happening in Dallas this year, just based on the coach speak, based on the coaching hires. So there's definitely a lot to dive into as we transition to the Jeremiah's favorite over here, our Dallas Cowboys. So let's talk about what I expect from the Dallas Cowboys in 2023. How do I expect things to change around this offense? Why do I expect those things to change? As I was just alluding to before hitting the banner, there's going to be some big philosophical changes based on the coaching hires at offensive coordinator, chiefly Brian Schottenheimer, and just Mike McCarthy's comments saying, I want to run the damn ball. I want to rest my defense, firing Kellen Moore for scoring too many points, throwing it too often, and leaving his defense not able to catch their breath apparently enough for Mike McCarthy's likings. So as you can see here, I definitely see a big drop in overall pass attempts for the Dallas Cowboys and a much closer to 50-50 run to pass ratio. And that's largely because of those comments I just alluded to, but also Schottenheimer. He's never been higher than 13th in the league in pass attempts. Every other year than that, in 12 years of calling plays, he's been outside the top 15 in pass attempts. Meanwhile, in his last 10 years calling plays, 4 of those teams were top 3 in rushing attempts. 3 of those teams were actually number 1 in rushing offense as well. He's only had 1 year above the 17th in pass attempts. So I do not expect this to remain a very pass-happy attack. Now, McCarthy consistently was above 60% or higher pass rate throughout the Dallas time so far in his tenure, but definitely in Green Bay. He was around 65% pass rate. So this would be a big departure from McCarthy, but he has continued to hint at, I want to run more, I want to run more, I want to run more, and he hired the perfect coordinator to just hammer the run in Brian Schottenheimer. So again, 565 pass, 509 rush attempts, 53 pass, 47 rush. I think that is a nice, fair balance between this offense and what they want to do this season. That'll obviously mean great things for Tony Pollard, but let's first cover what I expect for this passing game. Definitely a lesser pie for Dak Prescott. Still think he can do some decent damage with this one. 374 completions on 554 attempts for 4,200 yards, 27 touchdowns. I think that's a fair estimate. Maybe he gets up to 30 touchdowns. It's where he's been hovering, 3 of his last 4 years despite getting hurt. So I definitely think history could be on his side, and maybe he does crack that. He has the good weaponry. It's just a matter of volume. Are they going to throw it enough for him to get there? Thankfully, Schottenheimer, for all his faults, he did like to get cute in the red zone. You think about Russell Wilson, always around 4,000 yards, but around 30 to 35 touchdowns, given he did like to throw it when they got in deep. So I tried to stat that out and bumped up, CeeDee Lamb's touchdown total. He usually is around 6.5 to 7% receiving touchdowns. I bumped that up a little bit. He also, Brian Schottenheimer, again, the volume's usually down, but he does attack defenses very well off the play action, get the receivers deep, even if you wish you would cook it more with the pass games. What he does run in the pass game usually has had solid success with Lockett, with DK having some quality seasons under his watch. But this is going to be a pretty crowded target distribution, in my opinion. So I'll show you real quick where I shaped it out. 22% of the looks going to CeeDee Lamb, and that's a big number of looks. But if this pie really does shrink as I expected to under Schottenheimer, that only equates to about 124 targets. For a guy that saw over 170 last year at 27% share, that would be a big drop. But I also think Michael Gallup getting healthy, calling himself springy again, feeling like his real self, I think that's going to be a big buck. Remember, this team chose to go with Gallup over Amari Cooper. I think they're going to be definitely proven wrong in that decision, but nonetheless, they really do hold Michael Gallup in very high regard. He never really seemed like himself last year, and all the talk from Dak, from the coaching staff, and Gallup himself is he's really bouncing back and looking like his fast, springy self. So I think an 18% target share, 102 targets. When he was the number 3 receiver, that's typically what he was around, and I think him and Cooks, it'll be debatable which one's really the 2 here. I do like Cooks better, personally, myself as a player, and just for overall fantasy production this year. So I gave him a slight bump up, 107 targets versus 102 for Gallup, but they're going to be neck and neck. And the reason I don't have a ton of those guys is I do see them kind of nibbling at each other's cheese throughout the season. I also don't have a ton of CeeDee Lamb, despite this being a pretty solid projection. You can see with those 124 targets, 84 catches, and right around 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. A little bit of a downgrade from last year's stats, a couple more touchdowns for him. Just where he's going right now, ahead of Devontae Adams, for example, right around Amon-Ra St. Brown, even Garrett Wilson. I just have those guys a little bit higher, given I just think if this pass attack does not shrink under Schottenheimer and they throw it as much as they've been doing the last few years under Kellen Moore, then I think CeeDee Lamb warrants that position right alongside those guys. But to me, with more mouths to feed in a lower volume attack, I just don't get a ton of CeeDee Lamb at his price tag right now. And really any of these weapons, as much as I like all of them as a unit and think they could be a pretty dangerous passing attack, even on a low volume passing attack, I just don't really buy into them at their price tags. There's always somebody, Cook's going around, for example, Jahan Dotson or some other guys we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the Commanders. That doesn't leave a ton, though, with most of these targets dominated by that great trio of wide receivers. I do still think about 10% target share for Tony Pollard. He was at 11% last year, had over 60 targets. I think that's right around where we see him again. Deuce Vaughn maybe getting a little bit of a receiving role as their fourth round rookie, but he might not see anything. I don't think there's much outside of these receivers. Jalen Turbert or whoever ends up being. Noah Brown's gone at this point. So I really think it's going to be the big three, about 10% slice going to Pollard. And then the tight end position has been heavily featured by Mike McCarthy these last few years. Maybe that's because of Dalton Schultz, a very reliable guy, had that great rapport with Dak Prescott, but I don't think Schultz was overly special as a player. So if Ferguson, with all glowing reviews so far this OTAs, 14% share, right around 80 targets, 58 catches, 609 yards, and 4 touchdowns, I could see that being fair. And I do like him as a last round stab at your tight end position. Every single season we see a top 5 guy emerge from the last rounds or undrafted at the fantasy tight end positions. Happened for 3 straight years. It was Dalton Schultz just a couple seasons ago. So I wouldn't be shocked if Ferguson ends up doing that as well. But I think he would need this offense to remain pass happier. And again, I expect that to be reined in. So that's how I see the passing game. Again, nobody I get totally excited about, even though I think very solid production down the line. Just nobody at their price tags I really love. Who do I love at his price tag, though? Tony mother effing Pollard. I am in love with this guy. He has been an absolute machine in games without Zeke. So I project him quite aggressively. But man, I don't see much reason not to. One, as the overall offense becomes more run heavy, more overall work for the backs. And are you really going to take much away from Tony Pollard for Malik Davis, who's rumored to be the clear-cut number 2 so far? And Camp Deuce Vaughn's 5'6". That's not a guy that's eaten into the work too hard. Maybe Zeke does emerge back here. They've talked about that being a possibility, and the fact that he's still lingering out there, I could see him returning, but it definitely would not be at this point. The fact that they've had all this time to sign him and they haven't. If he does return, I don't think it's going to be a Zeke that's a 55-45 type of split. I still think Pollard would still see a very, very healthy portion of this role, and it would just kind of eat into the Malik Davis totals that you're seeing right here, maybe with a slight. Pollard might go to 250 and Zeke might go to 190 type of carries, a little bit meeting, but I still think Pollard would get a ton of work, more than he's ever seen. He's never crossed 200 carries before in his career, but I do think this is going to absolutely be the season that happens. His career high is 193 carries, which he had last year, right around 40% of the rushing workload. So now as the lead guy, I could definitely see that spiking from 250 to 280 where I have him right now. Whether he can hold up or not for that, we'll find out. He is a smallish back, but I really do get prime Jamal Charles type of vibes from him, given how efficient, shifty, dangerous as a receiver. That's how I get. I really feel that highly about Pollard, and I love Jamal Charles, one of my favorite players of all time. The fact that when we've seen Jamal Charles is a very similar career narrative in that when he was used, he was always a monster. It was just a matter of, he's always in a time split while he was at the Chiefs for a while. And then when Andy Reid came in and there was no more Larry Johnson or no more of these other guys there, and they finally gave him the keys, he was not only stayed healthy, he somehow maintained his efficiency and was an absolute juggernaut. Now, we've only got 3 instances of Pollard being that lead back and really and seeing what he can do in that situation. In the 3 starts he's had without Zeke Elliott, he averages 28.9 PPR points per game. He's on pace for 1,700 yards on the ground, 521 yards through the air on 91 targets, nearly 60 catches. So big spike in receiving work when he's not sharing that with Zeke at all. Big spike in total touchdowns, on pace. He had 2 touchdowns a game when Zeke was out. I don't think he would do that. Maybe 34 touchdowns on the year. That's not happening. But again, when you total all those, 48 carries, 315 yards, and 6 touchdowns, plus another 92 through the air in the 3 games without Zeke in his career, that's damn solid. And I expect this to be even a more run-heavy attack this season. So yes, these Pollard projections might seem nuts, but they're actually below the pace that he's on in the games without Zeke Elliott so far throughout his career. So 280 carries, maintaining that above 5 yards a pop, which he's been throughout his career. And again, anytime he's had 20 plus carries in a game, he still maintains. In fact, he's gotten better as the game has gone on. So 10 touchdowns, an elite touchdown score. That's what he had last year. And now with Zeke out there, that could even be conservative. I could see that being, though, where they get Malik Davis involved as a goal line hammer. A little bit of a bigger guy, so maybe 4 touchdowns mixed in there for Malik Davis, but some quality receiving usage. You've seen the highlights of Tony Pollard running a wheel and catching an 80-yard bomb. Like, he can run any of the routes, so I do think a quality receiving profile at 340 and 3 touchdowns, very reasonable, finishing the year at around 1,800 total yards, 13 touchdowns, 40 receptions. And again, that seems like a lot, but I really think that's a pretty quality, like, not floor, but not even the ceiling. Like you said, 28 points a game without Zeke in his career. And it's giving me those Jamal Charles vibes that, like, yeah, Jamal Charles, 28 points per game as a starter, but are never really going to get a start and never going to maintain that when he finally does get to start. And then bam, he does and continues to be a monster. I could see that similar narrative for Tony Pollard. So big fan of him in this run heavier scheme without Zeke Elliott. I think it's just an absolute smash play. He's going in round 2 right now, middle to late round 2. It's a no-brainer. Top 5 running back for me, and an easy smash at his price tag right now. So that wraps up our Dallas Cowboys. Now I'll move on here and wrap up the division here with your Commanders. So let's pull them up as I'm pulling them up. If you don't mind, if you're here with us live and you haven't already, do please consider hitting that thumbs up. Or if you're catching the replay and you're still with us this deep, it means you probably are liking something you're hearing, or you hate it enough and you just want me to watch me crumble. Who knows? But ultimately, if you do enjoy it, please do consider hitting that thumbs up for us, Wolfpack. It would mean the world. It does help us get out to more people. And we've seen the subs starting to rise yet again. You love to see that. Consider joining the Wolfpack if you haven't already. And of course, if you're here, let me know your questions, your comments. Give me anything in there. We had some good interaction from Tunes yesterday. Whoever's in here live, that's part of why I do this. And last request, not even request, but my man Alan Capps, I know you're probably tuned in here. If you're watching this on Twitter, we don't see those questions pop up live, but you can just comment on the tweet. I promise to answer any questions I get on any Twitter. If you want to interact with me on Twitter, at RotoStreetWolf, find this post. If you have a question about any of these or really any fantasy questions, just click on it, message me. But I love that, Alan Capps, you've been like giving me your feedback on the guys you don't believe in, and it gives me a good sounding board and things to reconsider. I love it. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know any of you feel crazy, any questions you have, especially on Twitter. I can't see those live, but if you, after the stream, comment on the live stream, just a post on it, I will be sure to get to everything. All righty, that's enough of that. So let me then pull in your Commanders, and we'll talk about what I expect in this new offense under Eric Bienemy. I think this is going to be a really big jump for a lot of players, the offense as a whole. And I'm shocked to, just like this entire division, I just really like this division. And I think this team is going to be due for a big step forward. Now, I understand this is not Pat Mahomes. This is Sam Howell at the charge. So we can't just be like, Eric Bienemy, he had a great play calling experience because he had the best quarterback of all time. I get that. They were always at 60% or higher pass rate since Mahomes took over. I'm not projecting that. But Ron Rivera, dating back to the Carolina days, has always been at 55% or higher, other than last season with the Commanders, where it was a near 50-50 split in pass and run. Even with Cam Newton, the guy liked to air it out, Ron Rivera. So he's not opposed to being a little bit pass happier. He's steadily been above league average as well. He likes to push the pace, Riverboat Ron. So I have them shaking out with a big jump in pass attempts compared to last year, where they were not even that huge of a jump, though. 571 pass attempts, another 25 or so in Bienemy, with a little bit of downgrade in the rush attempt department, given that I think they'll use the running backs a lot, but more so in the passing game. Taylor Gibson, I can't wait to tell you guys about my projection there. But as a team level, again, above average league plays is expected here, a little bit above average with pass rate over the run rate is what I expect. And I think one of the things that probably surprised me the most about this Commanders team is how much I ended up liking Sam Howell. I liked him actually coming out. I liked him as a rookie last year in rookie drafts. I couldn't believe he fell to round 5. And I think he's going to make a lot of NFL teams look dumb. He's only been on the field for very limited action. Preseason game as a starter, went 8 for 14, 129 with 2 rushing touchdowns in a little bit less than a half. Looked really good there. And he made one career start last year, had a rushing touchdown in that game, threw for around 170 yards. And this was in a gross overall offense, thinking Eric Biennemy's system. Howell coming out of college, 91.6 passing grade from PFF, 90.9 rushing grade from PFF. There was a lot to enjoy about him. Over 1,000 rushing yards. And it's weird because he runs like a 5.0 40, around Peyton Manning's level of speed, yet he just is a bull. He likes to run people over. He's much shifty. So his time speed does not reflect what we see on the field of him as a runner. So as you can see, interesting passing totals, 4,300 and 28 touchdowns. But then really, the 88 rushes, 440 yards, and 7 touchdowns, given that every time we've seen him on the field, he's rushed for a score. I don't think that's crazy. The guy really does like to call his own number when he gets in there. We saw over 1,000 yards rushing in college. So Sam Howell, very, very sneaky. Now, of course, this could go wrong if Sam Howell doesn't end up being the starter. If Jacoby Brissett beats him out, they say it's going to be a competition there. They also have said that Sam Howell, the beat writers, think he has a very, very big edge based on how he's been being used so far in training camp as the clear-cut number 1 guy. So I like Sam Howell quite a bit, as you can see there at the top. And how do I expect this to now trickle down? Let's discuss that in this passing game distribution. So right off the top, you can see 14% target share going to Antonio Gibson. That would be a huge spike, but we've seen McKinnon average right around 12 to 15% target share throughout his career. He's now gone. And you mix in the fact that Eric Bienemy has always used his running backs extensively in this Andy Reid style offense. Jerick McKinnon leading the league in fantasy points per touch last year as Eric Biennemy's pass catching back. So I think 14% target share, 83 to potential for even 100 targets exists there for Antonio Gibson, a converted wide receiver. All the training camp talk has been how often running backs are being used in the screen game and the slot, moving Antonio Gibson around as a mismatched nightmare is what Ron Rivera called him. I don't know. This is how he should have been used his entire career. Very explosive guy, very quality receiver. I really, really like Antonio Gibson seeing a quality target share here. But that's still 4th on the team because I like 20% target share going to Terry McLaurin. That's right around what he has seen. This would be the lowest targets actually for Terry McLaurin. I do think that's because Jahan Dotson's going to come in here. As you can see, I have him projected for quite a high amount of targets. But over his last seasons, Terry McLaurin, he has seen 141, 130, and then 120 targets at 25, 24, and 23% target share. So definitely could be a bit of a downgrade for Terry McLaurin because I think Jahan Dotson, if he ends up staying healthy all year, he missed some time last year, but I think he is an absolute stud, and I don't think the gap between these two is going to be too big. So 17% share over 101 targets coming for Jahan Dotson. How do I expect him to perform with that? I think McLaurin, nice 14 yards or so catch rate, catches a bit more of his passes. He's never been too crazy of a touchdown scorer outside of his rookie year where he had 9. We haven't seen a ton of touchdowns coming from McLaurin, 5 or less in 2 of his last 3 years, 6 on the other one. So not an elite touchdown scorer. Meanwhile, Jahan Dotson, 7 touchdowns last year. Despite missing time, it was 20% of his catches went for touchdowns. Now that's unsustainable, especially if he does get this type of volume increase that I'm projecting him for. But the kid can score. He's not a huge body, but he really knows how to get open, especially in the red zone, use that short area quickness. Was a beast last year at that, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't continue. So assuming he can stay healthy and get to that 100 targets or so I project him for, 8 touchdowns, feels very reasonable. That's a big drop, 13% TD percent from 20%. I think that with volume is a fair drop, but I also think 8 touchdowns is very, very much within his realm of possibility. So I've been big in McLaurin in early drafts. I still am. I still like him in that late fourth, early fifth range. But honestly, Jahan Dotson going 2 rounds later, he just came out so much better than I expected in projections. And I think that's the guy. If I'm going after one of these receivers at their price, I prefer him myself. And then you got Curtis Samuel. He's going to be a volume guy out of the slot. A good move around piece can get him in the backfield. I think Bienemy's going to have a real fun time with him. And that's the real risk, I guess, Gibson, is if he decides to use Curtis Samuel as a runner, move him to the backfield, and then split that receiving workload, we could see Gibson's share get eaten into and Curtis Samuel go up a bit. But right now I have him going similar to what we saw last year, 4 touchdowns, 653 yards, 61 catches on a fair amount of the share there, with another 10 catches and maybe rushing in, or 10 rushes rather, 80 yards and a touchdown there. I think is fair for Curtis Samuel, a fine late round stab, especially if you're going to pair him up with Sam Howell as a phenomenal late round stab at quarterback. And then tight end, that's the tricky piece here, is Bienemy's offense. Obviously, when you have Travis Kelce, you're going to funnel through the tight end. And I don't expect, a 20-ish% target share to go to any tight end, and certainly not even a combined 20% share. But we have already gotten reports that in camp, the tight ends are moving all over the place, are more active than they've ever been in a Ron Rivera style offense. It's Logan Thomas and Cole Turner both showing out right now. So if one of them becomes the clear-cut guy and the other one is a distant number 2, I could probably buy into them as good fantasy sleepers. I really do think this offense is going to be tight end friendly, especially with all these other weapons around, potentially creating these mismatches. But if they're constantly nibbling at each other's cheese, which is what I do expect, I don't know that either of them will ever become fully viable for you. Don't forget, Logan Thomas is just a couple seasons removed of being like a clear-cut, top 7 tight end pick. He's definitely getting up there in age, but I do think he can make some things happen there. Cole Turner, though, very exciting young guy, definitely more athletic, so maybe he's the ultimate one that becomes there. Definitely a situation to monitor in training camp if one of them can gain the edge over the others. And then we'll move to the running game and just talk about these guys real quick. Already the biggest piece of note, though, we already covered, is that I think 83 targets, 60 catches, 462 yards, and about 5 touchdowns. I know that 5 touchdowns might seem crazy, but we just saw Jerick McKinnon catch 9. Antonio Gibson averaged a touchdown every 9 touches last year. I think he's Jerick McKinnon on steroids. Now, he doesn't have Pat Mahomes to give those touchdown opportunities to happen more often, but I really don't think 5 receiving touchdowns is that crazy. He's also a great touchdown scorer on the ground. I've always been a pretty big Antonio Gibson guy, and typically he hasn't let me down. And I think this might be the best usage role, even with Brian Robinson, seeing more of the rushing work. As you guys can see here, 40% of the carries going to Brian Robinson. I think he's a solid guy that's probably going to only get better, given that last year he was recovering from getting shot before the season. I mean, that's a pretty bold ask of the guy. Maybe he can run in a few more than 5. But I do think Gibson's such a good red zone guy. And we saw how they like to put McKinnon in there and how cute Andy Reid and Bienemy like to get there when they get close. That's why I do have Sam Howell going for as many touchdowns, 28 as I do, throwing it there, running those in as well. That's where I do think Brian Robinson could be a little bit capped and just not bring a ton to the table. If his touchdowns are getting vultured by Howell in a more pass-happy attack, if his receiving work is pretty much nothing because we have Antonio Gibson doing some damage there, we can see Robinson catch. He is a fine receiver. He could definitely have some screens as a misdirect and do some damage there. But I just think he's definitely going at the same price as Gibson right now, a little bit overvalued. I think Gibson will have the more valuable role as that mismatch kind of move around chess piece for Eric Bienemy. So that's all I got for this team. Again, definitely much more excited about Sam Howell than I expected to be. Antonio Gibson I knew I liked, and as I statted him out, found reason to like him even more. And I really am just surprised at how much I'm going to love Jahan Dotson now. Definitely a round of 7-8 target. Terry M, still a guy I do like in that late 4th, 5th range, but somebody that I think came out a little bit less than I expected in these projections when you have to look at how this target share is going to pick up. But I do think all these ships do rise with Eric Bienemy, and this offense becomes a much more quality unit. All righty, Wolfpack. That wraps up all the teams for the NFC East. Let's see if we have any questions for you. I'll remove this so we don't have that. But let's see what we can do for you. What do we have for our questions? Go Cowboys. Tunes just talking up some trash. Cowboys are choke artists. Good to see you, Tunes, as always. Good loyal fan here for these shows. Thank you, Jeremiah Moore. Just saw you gave us a quick $1 super chat. Much appreciate supporting your boys, putting in the time. I appreciate that, just being here, my man. Jones couldn't do it with Ingram. Why do you think he's going to be able to do it with Waller? Because I think Waller's a better player than Ingram, and I think Brian Daboll is a better schemer than him. So yeah, I absolutely think that's good. And then Joe from Michael King. I don't know what Joe means. Which Joe was I just talking about? I have no idea. But Joe. All righty, guys. Thank you, those that are tuned in. On your way out, if you haven't already, that thumbs up button means the world. These projections will be available at rotostreetjournal.com alongside the rankings. Everything is pretty much free on the website other than these projections. It's a good way to support your boy once they do launch. I do consider doing that for us. rotostreetjournal.com is where you can find all that. At rotostreetwolf is where you can interact with me. Questions, anything that you have on this, please do send that my way. Be happy to answer them all. Cue up Ducks Wandale Moan. Yeah, that's gonna haunt my nightmares. I don't know if I can keep listening to that one, Tunes. All righty, guys. Thanks again so much for being here. In a world of fancy sheep, be that wolf. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m.